Hello, it's Kimberley Leonard at Sky News with our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsay. And Stuart's here because he's been reporting from inside Myanmar. Now, the point of this is really how much we don't know about what's happening there. It's a country torn apart by what is really a civil war, with thousands of people killed by the military regime in the last 2 years. And if and when journalists do get in, it's to see what the regime wants them to see. So Stuart and his team spent years organising this investigation, and they spent a month undercover, living in the jungle with fighters, medics and volunteers.
The injured keep coming. A secret hospital hidden in the jungle. The volunteers surround the latest victims and hurry them into the meagre emergency ward.
Was this your first time in Myanmar?
Yeah, it's not the first time of trying, but it was the first time we were successful. Journalists do get allowed in to Myanmar, but the problem is that, and our teams have experienced it, you're not unwatched. What has become clear is that the authorities had been very successful in actually denying that there's a civil war taking place.
You were there for 31 days, right? So what was it like, the fact that you didn't have anyone looking over your shoulder and seeing what you were doing?
Everyone I was working with, be them charitable organisations or the resistance movement, we could move anywhere with them and we could speak to displaced people. However, they can't take us to wherever we want to go either, because the big major towns, the major cities and the main roads are pretty much controlled by the Myanmar soldiers. So the countryside belongs to the resistance, if you like, and the cities belong and the towns belong to the Myanmar government soldiers. While we travelled around, we were in constant danger of being either attacked by artillery, mortars, or air bombardment by jets, etc., that are looking for targets, constantly, which made life very, very difficult. You had to live in the jungle. If you heard any type of aeroplane, all lights would be off straight away, even torches would be off. But, quite a lot of the time you were in darkness.
Just explain, if you will, what you did in Myanmar.
This was a whole series of stories on the effect of what is a previously poorly reported or underreported major civil war. We wanted to see the effects of that was happening on the local population, how people were dealing with it, how many numbers of people are being targeted by the Myanmar authorities, what effect it has on their lives, as in most of them leave their villages. And we wanted to focus on both the civilians and the resistance fighters, because of the armed resistance, and the injuries and effect on them that's having in what is really very nasty, very brutal and very widespread civil war. And while people knew about it, nobody had actually seen it, and certainly nobody has seen it in such detail as us. The Myanmar military junta is attacking various ethnic groups on a daily basis. Whole towns are empty because the churches, schools, medical centres, pretty much anything you can think of has been attacked. And so you have this enormous number of people who are displaced from their homes, but who are actually saying to us when we talk to them how that instead of breaking their resolve, in many ways the Myanmar authorities are actually making that resolve even stronger, which I think that they did not expect to happen. I think that's what's made this 2-year civil war different to other uprisings in the past, is because there seems to be a real sense that the Myanmar people from all the various ethnic groups are saying, no, we are going to stand and we are going to stand together. They're not particularly well coordinated because it's so many different states, and the states speak different languages and they're quite difficult to get to, and communication is poor. But they all know the other one is fighting, and that has perpetuated this civil war, which I'm pretty certain the authorities thought would peter out before now. It's like a conveyor belt of horror, and it never stops. Whereas there's 5 patients that are now being brought in.
The things that you documented are absolutely horrific, and yet you get the sense that they're just going to carry on and do whatever it takes. Can you tell us a bit more about the characters that you met in your time there? What did they tell you? What did they experience that really gives us an idea of what's actually happening there?
We were always moving. We didn't change camp every night, but it was only every few nights because you just couldn't stay anywhere for too long because of the likelihood of spies. The only place we spent more time was the hospital that we focus on quite a lot. Was set up by 3 people, all city kids. They expected to be doctors and living a good, affluent life. They had no expectation of this. They took to the streets when the coup happened 2 years ago. And when their friends started getting shot and killed on the streets, they joined the uprising against or the resistance against the Myanmar junta. Their resilience in dealing with what is quite horrendous every single day is quite remarkable. The fact that they just keep turning out acts of miracle in many ways, miracles that they're doing on people, brain surgery in the middle of the forest, for example. You wouldn't have thought it was possible. Very complex amputations. And yet they are continuously determined to continue, even though they know they're being hunted down.
The right side of the brain is severely damaged by this shrapnel.
So you'll be doing brain surgery today?
Maybe.
Some remarkable characters. Dr. Mukang Kuku, who's the chief surgeon. He's only in his mid-30s. A larger-than-life character, dyed pink hair and always a big smile on his face, but absolutely brilliant at his job. And others within that group that were there were just inspirational to all of us, actually. We met a lot of civilians. I was always remarkably impressed by how determined they are too, even though they've lost their homes, even though they're scared the whole time, even though may have been forced out of their homes 2 or 3 times and taken their kids in the middle of the night. All of these type of things that they've had to do. They still enduringly carry on fighting. Some of them have only moved a few miles away from where their original homes were because they want to stay near the rice fields. They see they have no choice but to do that. It's still incredibly dangerous, but they put up with it. And again, and this is something that happened a lot to us, was people saying, why do we get no support from the international community? And many made the link to Ukraine.
Did you bring up Ukraine, or were they the ones?
They were bringing it up before I could bring it up. But the question we'd all talked about, do you think we'll ask them about Ukraine? And they were in there first. And I remember Maui, one of the leaders of a fighting group, he, in many ways in our piece we used, vocalized how many people felt that they're drawing the comparison with Ukraine, and we found ourselves difficult for us because we couldn't actually answer them.
They always say that they are concerned, they deeply concerned, they strongly, deeply concerned. They use a lot of grammar words, but no action. So, yeah, we realize that we have to do it ourselves. We have to fight it ourselves. Even less resource or more resource, we're gonna make it. It's nothing different from Ukraine. Russia's big thing, like Ukraine's like minority. Ukraine also fight for their autonomy, fight for their future. The same thing. I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation futures.
Well, it's interesting you call it a civil war, the civil war in Myanmar, because it's not terminology that we're used to. And when it's always reported, it's something that just rolls off the tongue easily, isn't it?
A civil war is when you've got a proper war taking place. Now, it's unfair because one side has a lot more weapons than the other. But it is much more than an uprising. It is actually a civil war because so much of the country is affected. I'm not quite sure how one delineates what is an uprising, what's a civil war. But to me, who's been in civil wars all over the world, this was definitely one. I mean, it's not just that there's not much international support for the resistance movement. It's not that they're not getting lots of weapons. They aren't getting any weapons that they can't afford to buy themselves. It's the fact that the IDPs, the displaced people, aren't being looked for. You'd expect there to be huge amounts of support. There's none that I could see, apart from really small charities. You would almost expect to see the big UN sort of operation in place.
You say IDPs, those are internally displaced people displaced within their own country.
Yeah.
Some of them have moved 3 times over 2 years, right?
Maybe more. There's been such a resistance to the Burma regime, as they call it the Burma regime always, Myanmar, as we know it now, for a long time. One of the wars, I think it's the Karen State War, has been going on for 53 years. So, I mean, it's ingrained. But it's really changed in the last 2 years. And, yeah, they may well have, over the years, been kicked out of their houses, but they may well have been moved from their houses 3 times in the last 2 years. They lose everything, everything. And incredibly, they build the bamboo huts again, and they move in, and people, you'll get tarpaulin, and they'll make it work. And then it happens again, and they move again. Incredible.
So you hear the jets overhead, and then it's terrifying footage of little kids hunkering down.
A jet fighter is bombing them. Terrified, they huddle in a crater. They're told to keep down. They pray together.
What are the children like? Because if there's been war in these states for 50 years, there will be people there who've known nothing but this absolute terror, the need to keep moving, the fact that you could die in the next half an hour.
I think the effect is going to be terrible on a whole generation who may never know peace and may never know what it's like to have a place that you call home. There was one lady, Miss Lynn, she's actually from the hospital as well, but she also runs her own charity thing, and she feeds 4,000 displaced people
How does she feed 4,000 displaced people?
She would you believe, like crowdfunding and things like that on the internet, people just send her money, and it's some from outside, but most of it from inside Myanmar. I don't know how she does it. You felt inadequate when you were with these people. I mean, she was remarkable. The IDP villages, the displaced people villages, are pretty much just their own village that has just moved. So the same rules still apply, the same elders, and they have a voting system. So it's really quite well organised. And so what's nice is that when you have feeding time, if it be by charity, the children go first, and then the elderly go next, and then the stronger up, and they're last. And the children are great, they're great fun. But you only have to go with another medical charity that we joined that was doing medical work. And, there's malnutrition everywhere. There's kids are poorly. They're living outside. So there's quite a lot of, you hear coughing and sneezing and all the rest of it all the time. Particularly the elder community is suffering from incredible amount of stress. They have a lot of concern about people with bad heart, etc. And a lot of that is brought on by the continuous stress and the fact of the bombing. When people are fundamentally stressed when they immediately react in the same way when a threat appears. And a threat is literally a plane. And everyone runs. And it's not like you're standing around and looking up at the sky. They all know what could happen. Many of the children have experienced it, know what it's like. Children cowering and praying together. They were at school when that happened. And so they're growing up knowing that anything in the air could kill them. But you see kids smiling and playing, of course you do, but you always do. But I think the effect on society will not go away for a very, very long time.
You said that they're attacking schools. You described a Catholic church that you saw that had been destroyed, and a hospital. And you describe how it looks like people just got up and ran. Mm-hmm. What was it like going into the hospital? I mean, you've been to Syria, you've seen your fair share of destroyed hospitals.
The staff there had said they wouldn't leave it because it was so obviously a hospital and there was no reason to bomb it. It was strafed and bombed, and I think 2 or 3 people would die. But then the staff got the people out, and they all went into the forest. And inside, you can see where they were literally working on patients. There were syringes still in bottles, and it literally was as if somebody had just gone. And I know that their staff had to carry them out. And the reason why we know what happened is because we found a lady who had survived that attack and had just had a baby just before the attack happened. And she got out to the countryside, and she said it was like absolutely terrifying for her because when the jets come in, they usually fly over at least once, probably twice before and low, so it's coming. But that's just they're getting there.
And the sound itself is so terrifying.
The sound is terrifying because it's really, really loud. So after the bombing, they then came back with machine guns. I mean, it was just, that hospital was targeted to be destroyed. Probably a near miracle that more people weren't killed in it. The attacking of schools is a strange one as well. But again, it's to break down society in a way, to make people realise that absolutely nothing is sacred and that they can actually, wherever they go, they could be attacked and forced on. And as I said before, it's working in terms of actual physical effect that it's having on people, but I don't think it's working in terms of actually reaching any type of resolution. There seem to be no talks taking place. There appears to be no will by the military junta to have any type of discussion with anyone about the subject. And I think the opposition groups probably suspect that actually any talk with the military junta would be a waste of time because they don't trust each other. So you are actually in this terrible position whereby a civil war is taking place. One side is heavily armed, has support from China, Russia, and Iran. The other side has support from actually nobody. And one of them, another commander, put it to me. It's really easy. He said, why is it the countries that we all recognise as evil are actually good at uniting, and that the other countries that we all recognise are good can and never agree on anything? And it was like a really interesting point he made. Mentioned Maui beforehand. He used to be a farmer himself before he
where did he get that name? It's from a...
He's a Disney character's name. He used to have really long hair. I don't know Maui character, but Dominic, my producer, tells me that he's absolutely identical to him. He was an organic farmer and is now a fighter. Another guy I was talking to who was another commander, now a fighter, he used to work for an NGO that was focused on child smuggling from Burma. The point is, these are not fighters, but they are now. So in the way that they have moved on to the military side, it's no different to the many doctors and medical workers that have taken up this life in the jungle. They're both doing it because they've reached the point there's no other way. They're never going back to what it was. That's why the junta's failing.
What were your thoughts as you were getting out of Myanmar, and what do you hope will the response be to your reporting?
We wanted to thank everyone, but it was incredibly emotional because we did feel that we were leaving. When we left the hospital, we felt really bad because it's like, we know there's a really good chance we'll never see any of these people again. And they knew it, they know it too. And then when we left the others that had been taking us around and had looked after us for all that time, I was very emotional. And I got back on to one of the boats that we needed to take, and I thought I might never come back here again. It was very emotional. Will they be successful? It's possible. The civil war could be, but it could take an awful long time. But they do seem determined to do it. Now, why do we do this? Well, we wanted to see what's going on. First, we wanted to see what was going on, and secondly, we wanted to show people what is going on. Already there have been guests on Sky who have been saying we needed this to be out there, and some of them are very well connected, and I suspect that we will see things at least get some international attention. What would you like is to actually have a country like China say to Burma, to all the Myanmar authorities, you've got to stop doing this and try to arrange some type of meeting. I don't expect that to happen. I think the best you can really hope for is that perhaps the larger NGOs and aid agencies can actually try to find a way to get some, perhaps a humanitarian corridor to get...
Because they can't get in, one would assume.
They can't get in at the moment. It's too dangerous. So they need to have an agreement with both sides to allow them to go in and set up proper feeding stations and proper medical centres. And I think that's the best that you can hope for. The United States government is aware of all of this. It does know what's happening for certain. And it has made comments on it on the past, and they've put in some sanctions against the Myanmar military leaders. But I think if our reporting has done anything, it has shown that this is going on and it can't just be ignored. Not now, because it's not a secret. I mean, it wasn't really a secret before, but it's definitely not a secret now.
Okay, Stuart, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
You can watch Stuart's reports from Myanmar on the Sky News YouTube channel. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce and the editor was Paul Stanworth.